We're going to get into a really juicy conversation today. I can feel it.
Sure. Oh, yes. This juiciness is everywhere. When we're faced with the dysfunction of our nuclear families, I know that I went through many different phases and stages, and so much of it was trying to get them to see the dysfunction, and a lot of that pushing for them to see, to be on the same page, pushing for closure, for them to understand. And the harder I pushed, the worse it got. So I feel like that's a great example to tie into our nuclear families. Like the energy we're bringing to when we acknowledge the dysfunction in our nuclear families, what is our relationship with that? Because it's one thing to say, like, oh, all families are dysfunctional, and that's a big problem. And then I feel like the next step is for us to say, okay, what is my relationship with that dysfunction going to be?
How do you define nuclear family and how do you define toxicity?
You can have a chosen family if you don't have blood parents, or if you don't have immediate family, if you're an orphan, if you've been adopted, if you're just finding yourself without any kind of sense of family. It could be just the people that are around you. So nuclear for me is just proximity. Our parents, our siblings, that's usually our nuclear family. But it could be our aunts, our uncles. A lot of people are raised by their grandmothers. I've seen that
Mm.
being a really common thing in the US. The relationship with their parents, the unhealthier it is, usually the grandparents will step in to play nuclear caretakers.
With people who've come from poverty, the mother is left to look after the children on her own. She can't because she has to go out to work. So the grandparents step in. The child is raised by the grandparents. It's common. And in some cultures, it was normal to be raised by grandparents or extended family.
So true. Yes, I see that a lot in Indian culture, European cultures, Italy, Italian culture. Like that's very normalized, but in the US, not so much. So
Even
usually
African,
when,
Caribbean.
yeah, yeah,
We've named quite a few countries where it's very normal.
yes, and very healthy. Yeah.
What is your definition of toxicity?
For me, it's about destruction versus connection. Our nuclear family, are they helping us feel connected to ourselves, connected to each other? Or is there a lot of pulling apart?
We all know what it feels like to exist in a family where, more often than not, disconnection is being promoted, whether it's disconnection from our emotions, disconnection from our dreams and true desires, disconnection from each other, disconnection from truth in conversation, levels of disconnection, right? Maybe my perspective is tainted by my own experiences and also being in the trauma healing world for so long. But more often than not, families are perpetuating levels of disconnection. We may have food and we have a roof over our head, but that doesn't mean that we're fostering connection, emotional connection, spiritual connection.
Agreed. And providing for our family has a place, but I agree, without emotional safety. So another word would be safety. Do I feel safe? Do I feel safe with my family? Do I feel emotionally safe? Do I feel safe to be myself?
The impression I got was that you were alluding to the fact that inherently the nuclear family is toxic. Did I get that really wrong?
No, I agree. I mean, it's such a terrible doomsday thing to say. Most people that I know, I think that an example of a healthy nuclear family is very rare. And then there's also spectrum, like there's degrees. There's no such thing as a perfect family. There's going to be some level of conflict, of challenge, of discord. That's also just a part of human dynamic. But I think that we have strayed so far, and strayed implies that we were once very healthy. But I think that when we look at how people's relationships with their families impact their trauma, So I know for myself, typical daddy issues, my inability to connect with others was a direct reflection of my conditioning with my nuclear family. I think so many of us are starting to become aware of how handicapped we can be on a day to day by the dysfunction in our nuclear families. So maybe it's less so much of, is everyone, fucked? Is everyone unhealthy? Is everything just like terrible? And more of acknowledging the fact that if most people's experiences include dysfunction in their nuclear family, how is that affecting me? And to what degree is that affecting me and the
Mm.
people around me?
Before we go into the micro and the personal level of how the nuclear
Yeah.
family affects the individual, let's go into the system that creates the nuclear family.
Yeah, how far back do you want to go?
The nuclear family system is a relatively new thing if you're going to look at the whole history of the world.
Sure. Yes,
Like
to
even
some degree. Yeah, I mean, the idea of even on a biological level, so the idea of two humans coming together to protect their offspring. I mean, we can trace that back. That's sort of a nuclear family. So the incentive is to protect the young, to take care of the young, so that they can continue the lineage. It's good. We can go back to very simple, basic. And then I think the nuclear family has just evolved from there. But for me, it's something that has existed since we've had the urge to reproduce.
I mean, my concept is not based on absolute any level of historical fact, but I always considered that it was quite a recent thing,
Hmm.
like that we have, two people have exclusively together with no one else at the same time choose to have children in a sequential order with that same person and raise them until for 18 years
Oh, I
together,
see. So,
entirely together.
yeah, so you're talking kind of the modern nuclear family, this
Mm.
idea of there's a mom and dad and that's it, as opposed to the extended nuclear family. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that is definitely very recent. I agree completely. Yeah. But
What did
I'm no
we have before
historian
that?
either, so yeah.
No, neither am I. We should get a historian on. It would
I
be
know.
fascinating, wouldn't it? They can fact check all of our myths, that all these myths that we're
Yes.
perpetuating online, right? But like, okay, so that's what we're saying is like maybe feels like a relatively modern concept, the immediate nuclear family,
Yeah, I
right? Where
mean,
a couple live together and they
yeah.
single-handedly together without anybody else living in their household. It's them and the children. I know in some cultures that was not normal. No, it was always normal to live in a tribe, to live with extended family. You'd give birth, in India, you'd give birth to your child and your sister and your aunties would be stepping in immediately. And you actually don't even pick up the child for the first few months because you're recovering your body.
Wow,
You just
incredible.
the woman gives birth to the baby, hands the baby over to the women of the family, and she doesn't even feed herself. She's fed. God, you
Incredible.
look like you'd love that, Justine.
I think that's very healthy from what I understand. I have done some diving into the world. I thought about being a birth doula for a while, and I might go back to that at some point in my life. So, going into birth culture, all of that was a really big thing for me at some point. When you think about what the uterus goes through after birth, it takes weeks of recovery just on a physical level. So, the idea that the family has innate tradition of stepping in to feed the mother. To me, that's very healthy.
It's interesting how it's feeding physically, perhaps also feeding energetically and emotionally,
Oh,
and just
yeah,
letting
of
that
course.
woman stay in that state of surrender and receptiveness
Yes. And
while she's.
recovery. In many ways, birth is a really traumatic experience on the body. For a lot of women, it can be a very painful, many women don't survive the birthing process. So the idea of having support and recovery after giving birth, to me, that's very healthy.
Do you think that the cultures that promote and enable that do so and did so because they actually witness the birthing process happening? So they can see the effect it's having on a woman's body? Because in those villages and those tribes, the woman wouldn't be taken away and removed from her home or her family. to go to a hospital to deliver her baby with doctors, she would actually be delivering it with her own sisters and her own relatives, mother, grandma, right, at home. So
Yes.
they are part of the birthing process. They literally see the trauma that the woman goes through. They feel it because they're not just in the field, they're in the same room, right?
Yeah.
Modern day societies, like the woman goes off to a hospital, gives birth, comes back, baby's wrapped in like nice, you know, Gucci, right?
Yeah.
Gucci blankets, right? And comes back and like it looks like the mum hasn't done anything. And then mum's like, I'm really tired. And everyone's kind of looking at her, well, you look fine, love. Your
Oh,
baby's,
so true. We
you
see
know,
that
like
on social media all the time. These pictures of mothers after giving birth in makeup. I feel like there's a lot of pressure to look beautiful, to look like it was so easy, to look like, oh, motherhood is just natural to me and just a breeze. I
gosh,
look gorgeous.
you know what? The pressure that that must put women under.
Yeah. Yes. Especially when it doesn't go that way, it must be devastating.
Comparison is the thief of joy, and it should probably be the most
Yes.
joyful time of your life. But it's natural to look around, you
Yeah,
know,
of course.
and people got to share stories, whether or not you like it. But it's, yeah, it's just making me think like maybe because the women, it, women would be living in extended family, living in community, they would be birthing in community where the empathic connection is there. Like, so of course you're going to feed your woman, you're going to feed your sister, you're going to feed your friend because you literally have been there for 8 hours with her, right, through it.
Yes, completely. I see the connection there. I see you
Mm.
connecting those dots. The idea of people witnessing that has, I'm sure, have a big impact on their ability to be like, wow, this is important for me to support this person.
It's really interesting how we do it so differently now.
Yeah,
Like,
more disconnection, like you said. I mean, the idea of compartmentalizing. So now I'm in a hospital, I'm in a room with people I don't know. And then there's some women who are like, oh, I don't want my mother-in-law there. I don't want my parents there. And I think that is more tied to when there's unhealthy relationships with your nuclear family. Of course, you don't want people that are not going to be supportive in the room.
I've worked with women who have actually been, they've had their mother there or their mother-in-law there, but it's actually really hurt them
Yes.
during
And
the birthing process
stressful.
because they're not being supported. They're being told
Yeah.
what to do. Grandmother knows best. And mother's
Yes.
been through it 4 times, so mother has opinions naturally. She's been through
Yes.
this 4 times. She's going to impart opinion. She's going to
Yeah.
tell you what she thinks is best, not necessarily in the right way. And
Yeah.
then the woman is getting triggered, and it's like,
Yeah.
you're here to support me to do it my way. Maybe because we have changed as women and we want to do it our way. We have a level of independent thought now. Whereas before, maybe the women were more passive in these extended families. What are your thoughts? Like, how did the women that back then allow their births and you know, their recovery process to be completely facilitated by other women? Because they would have had to be in a recipient role a lot of it, a lot of the time in these cultures.
I get the feeling this speaks on behalf of generational trauma. The dysfunctions get passed down through generations. It's like a waterfall effect. That's been my experience. And so I think that in a lot of tribal cultures or village cultures where there's already a lot of health in their foundation versus, for example, my grandmother who went through World War II and has these generational wounds that never got healed that just get passed down to my mother, and then my mother adds hers, and it gets passed down to me. And so all of a sudden, in our relationships, we're carrying unresolved trauma. I guess for me, it's this idea of unresolved trauma. So I think in a lot of tribal settings, you see that they have these ancient tools of resolving, whether it's a lot of like body somatic. So if you look at, and even in India, I mean, there is so much body somatic processing of trauma that has really been stripped away from European, Western culture. What I feel is that the pressure of the wounds is kind of festering and building without a release. And that goes back to the societies we've created, especially in America. And so going back to the hospital room, if your grandmother's standing there and your mother's standing there with all this like unresolved issues, then it's just going to get passed to you and your baby. And that is on a very unconscious level that you may just like have a lot of fear around that. Like there's no trust, because we don't have these healthy outlets for processing that kind of pain.
That's really beautifully put. I love how you've made the connection between almost like the way of life that
Mm,
the indigenous and the tribal people would be embodying. It's their way of life. They don't see trauma healing or somatic trauma therapy as a separate thing from living their life.
yes.
It's their whole life is ritualized and is
Yes.
the sacredness in everything. It's woven in to the day to day. They don't have the linear kind of timeline that we have. Modern
Yes.
day society, most people
Yeah.
don't see their job as worship. Whereas
Yes.
in the indigenous way of life, it's like, well, you're plowing the land. That's worship. You're sowing your seeds, right? You're
Yes.
hunting. Like you're so connected to nature that everything becomes a form of prayer, a form of devotion, a form of healing. And that's really powerful because, as you said, it's all somatic. Now we're so disconnected from that lifestyle that, we're doing like 1 hour therapy a week,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that's going to
Yes.
solve intergenerational trauma. I always say to my clients, we have to weave healing into it has to become part of our lifestyle. There's no point doing things that traumatize you and then, 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week, you go and do a women's healing circle. But what have you been doing for the whole 6 days of the week?
Yes.
Dancing around the fire, such a deep, deep healing because you never dance alone. When was the last time you saw someone dancing around the fire on their own? If you saw someone dancing around the fire, the first thing you do is go up and start dancing with them, right? It's a communal thing, it's community. Healing that happens when your nervous system is connected to other people's. They
Yes.
start moving, dancing, activating that within you. You start moving, dancing, shaking, right? Activate that in someone else. You all
Yes.
do it together.
Yes.
And it's seen as sacred, it's seen as ritual, it's not something freaky, it's just seen as a way of life.
Yeah.
And now we have nuclear family.
Right. Yeah.
Why would we do this to ourselves, Justine?
Good questions. Good
I
question.
mean, you talked about the trauma and intergenerational trauma and war,
Yeah.
all valid.
I think we get pressured by systems that we live in. Capitalism plays a role. How we're going to make a living, how we're going to provide for ourselves and our family, and then what are the systems that I'm born into? And then the idea of once a system has so much momentum, trying to change that is, wow. Oh,
Industrialization, agriculture.
yes.
What came first?
As far as I know, agriculture was kind of a natural byproduct. Humans went from like moving, like tribal, moving through the land, and then decided, okay, well, if we stay in a place for a certain amount of time, what does that look like? And how do we survive doing that instead of moving with the herd, moving with the season? If we're going to stay in a place stationary. So the human concept of staying more local was birthed.
My understanding is that the agriculture, the nomadic lifestyle, which was very
Right.
normal, started to change. I don't know what triggered the change, whether it was seasonality or whether it was tech, some degree of advancement in transportation or I don't know, the development of the wheel. We definitely need a historian on this show. But it's interesting to think that we were once nomadic. And then at some point, we decided to stay longer in certain locations. And staying longer in certain locations led gradually over the course of many, many generations to this sense of ownership over the land.
Yeah, and then that translates into ownership over my space and ownership over, okay, like what else am I gonna take ownership over if I'm localized? Yeah.
And property rights and Then
Yeah.
we come into the separation, right? Because if you own
Yes.
something, there's a boundary.
And then how
Maybe
do I protect that boundary? How am I protecting my assets? Now all of a sudden I have this sense of ownership of the land, which didn't exist before. Now it's like, oh, how am I going to protect my land and my people and my family? And which I think really sparks that notion of competition, which I think capitalism was really kind of birthed from. Is this idea of like, oh, okay, like if I'm competing, because human competition has existed as far as we know, like since the beginning of time to some degree. I mean, the idea of competing for resources, you can trace that back, but the idea of capitalism promoting competition for the individual. So I think that transition from there again, like this idea of tribe to individual.
we go from tribe to individual, we go from moving to stationary, and then we end up going from community to family. The family system becomes the whole community. The family system is expected to play the role of what previously would have been played by the whole community.
Yes.
What are your views on that?
Like, no wonder it's fucked up. I feel like you just said it. Like, the idea of now we are trying to play the roles of an entire community with two people. Like, no wonder that's not working. I think we're trying, and I think some people do a phenomenal job, but I think at its core, we're not designed that way.
I'm seeing now a desire, especially amongst our generation, to somehow find that again.
Yes.
I can't count the number of conversations I've had this month where people have been talking about wanting to live in community and
Oh, I
wanting.
love that. I love hearing that. I'm so glad you brought that up.
I love it too. I also find it terrifying.
Oh,
Yeah.
tell me.
For me personally, it's so radically different from anything that I've done and anything that I've experienced because I've been born in London, lived in London my whole life, in a house that I consider mine. I don't
Wow.
have people coming in and out and, you like using my saucepans and like, do you know what I mean? I've got very used to living like this and to suddenly go, well, there's no boundaries now. It's open quarters. It's we, not I, right?
Yes.
I don't work for me. I work for us. And I
Mm,
trust, I think that's a big one. I
yeah.
trust that every actor in this system is equally invested in the reciprocation.
And is a safe person.
And I have, I've never lived in community. Lots of people have, and so they all have their stories. But I have heard a lot recently where people are, and I want to talk to you about this and see what your thoughts are because it's now being pinned as this like holy grail. It's
Mhm.
living on the land, off grid,
Mhm.
self-sufficient, in community, stationary still. Not I don't haven't met anyone who desires to be nomadic, and I'm not talking about digital
Oh, yeah.
nomads, right? That's not really nomadic. Laptop going from coffee shop to coffee shop around Europe, right, on an aeroplane, that is not nomadic.
True. I've seen this trend of RV culture. People buying RVs, homeschooling their kids, and traveling in families together, living kind of like modern nomads, like modern gypsies. And I see that picking up some momentum.
What is it do you think that people are craving?
I think that there's a recognition that community is necessary, is vital, and that the way we are living right now is not working. I think people are really starting to wake up. I am not healthy, my community's not healthy, and I feel like people see our health declining. The shadow aspect to that is the potential for that to be unhealthy, is when we were talking about last time, like cults and this idea of safety. Like we've seen people get burned by the desire for community and then being manipulated by that. I don't mind sharing my space if I know that this is a safe person to share my space with.
I would like to do an episode on cults.
Yeah.
We promised that we would do that, so we will do that. I want to keep us on track, right? The toxic nuclear family. We have this relatively new family system where we're trying to recreate everything that we were getting from a community or an extended family. And what you're suggesting is that it's impossible.
That's my take on it. Yes.
I
Yeah.
really, really agree with you. The way you said there's some people who are doing a phenomenal job at this. I agree. In this day and age, you can do a phenomenal job if you have a lot of resources,
Right. So you can
right?
kind of create your community. I can
Mhm.
hire a nanny.
Right.
I can create my village through my financial means.
Exactly. You can
Yeah.
hire your nanny, your
Yes.
window cleaner, your
Yes.
gardener, your
Yeah.
driver, your
Yeah.
cook, your homeschooler, your personal trainer. They're facilitating the roles that would have been provided by members of the tribe. So your financial status dictates your ability to provide that level of resourcing for your family. Now, that's
Right.
a minority of people. Let's talk about where the majority lie. We don't have those resources and we have to do it ourselves.
And people are getting burnt out and sick.
Let's talk about women in particular.
Yeah.
Then we're going to let's talk about how this is affecting women's ability to be in their feminine.
On a personal level, um, I had surgery on an ovarian cyst that was starting to metastasize. And it took me a while to recognize that so much of my womb trauma, so much of the illness in my body, my immune system, so much of that is really connected to not being supported, trying to do the village by myself, trying to work a job full time to support myself. And the idea of having children, I mean, after I had, even when I tried to have children intentionally, because I had had an abortion really early on. So at the age of 14, I had an abortion. And that also was due to a lot of nuclear dysfunction, being completely abandoned by my family. I've talked to a lot of women who have had abortions or pregnancies early, like teen pregnancies, and a common theme is having a very abusive father figure. So I think a lot of girls will look for that. It's like a natural need to have this father figure that is able to provide containment and safety and attention. When that isn't there, we will unconsciously go look for that in other places, and usually it's the wrong places. Because when you're young and you're developing, 14-year-old boys don't give a shit about keeping you safe. And then the girls have this drive to be taken care of. For me, being abandoned by my father really pushed me to seek in places that I shouldn't have been. I think that goes back to this idea of our nuclear families are really affecting our health as women and our ability to be mothers, our ability to be healthy. When we carry trauma in the wound, like an imprint, it tends to just repeat itself later. Yeah, so I think that's my take on that.
That's really, really brave of you to share that. 14 is really, 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 really young, you know,
Yeah, it is.
to have that, to go through that physically and to have to learn what life is about that young.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
it's like you're immediately recreating the abandonment wound, right? Because it's
Yes.
like you're really trying to resolve it unconsciously. I feel like a lot of women who maybe went through that and feel bad for whatever reason, of all ages, you know, they're gonna hear that and be like, sigh of relief. It's not just
Oh,
me, you know, especially.
yes, I encourage if anyone's listening, we could just take a deep breath.
Yeah, absolutely. Together, in it together. You got through it, you know, in it together and you got through it. The pressure that women are being put under to do everything in a nuclear family. I really want to go into this in a little bit more detail because I think a lot of women don't realize the pressure they're under, the multiple roles that they're playing, the complete lack of support and compensation that they're actually getting. When this is normalized and perpetuated generation to generation, and every woman just keeps her mouth shut about it, it becomes normalized. I consider it a level of patriarchal programming and feminine suppression that is kind of silently in the background, right?
Yes.
For a lot of women, it's a sense of self-worth to do all of this for their family,
Yes.
work, to provide, to
Yes.
cook, to clean, to
Yeah.
tend to the garden, to educate the children, to drop them here and drop them there, to look beautiful for your husband, to be booking all the holidays, to be planning ahead in advance, to be the emotional supporter, to be the cheerleader, to be everything. When a woman hasn't had that self-worth, right, in her beingness, which I know how that feels,
Oh, yeah.
to want to do more and more and more and achieve more, because
Yeah.
I felt like that was the only way that I would feel good about myself.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
I think that we do it as women collectively. We wear all these hats, right? And it's so normal. No one's talking about it.
Yeah.
And then we think it's giving us this sense of like virtue or self. I'm so good. Look what a woman I am. Such a great mom, such a great wife. Look at how much I do for my family. On the one hand, it's really beautiful service and it does show the power of a woman to do all of that. But on the other hand, why does a woman need to do all of that in the first place? Why is that normal?
I think we're starting to see the consequences become very materialized. Gabor Mate talks a lot about how, in his case studies, especially with breast cancer, there is an alarming connection between women adopting this role of do it all and those that are becoming susceptible to terminal illness, breast cancer, autoimmune, Hashimoto's. And he talks about this openly now. My mother had breast cancer, and a lot of the people that I see that are living differently than that are not becoming as susceptible to those health issues. I definitely think there's a direct correlation between this idea of putting too much on the body, on the mind, and it's naturally going to reflect itself in your health. Yeah.
Absolutely. The prolonged level of overstimulation in the nervous system, that has an effect on all of our organs, on our entire hormonal system, on our neurochemistry. And when it's not picked up on because it's very normal and we're not used to slowing down and connecting with our bodies and feeling any sensation, we go from, oh, I'm normal to boom, I've suddenly got cancer.
Yes, yes.
And
We
that
don't
people
even
say came out of
notice.
nowhere. I'm the healthiest person in the world. No trauma, no problems. Happy as Larry.
I
I'm
juice every day.
right.
I've seen a lot of health freaks get really, really ill to
Yeah.
recognize, like, oh, I actually had all this unresolved pain that I was carrying and I didn't even know about it.
Yeah. It's deeply dormant. And if no one challenges the cage, if no one comes and knocks on your door, rattles the cage a little bit and shows you where you are, right? You can continue like that. Imagine everyone around you is also living like all the women around you also living like that.
Yes,
You don't have any contrast. You don't have any frame of reference or perspective. It's totally normal to be in that like
yes,
fear, which is a fear state.
yes,
The overstimulation is actually a cortisol addiction and an addiction to fear,
yes,
right? But we'll say I'm not scared because you're dissociated from the emotion.
yes. It's part of your survival.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's part of survival. So you end up existing then. It's a really, really sad and terrible thing to have to awaken to. I do wonder like how much of this is perpetuated by the nuclear family and
Mm,
how much women are expected to do to be worthy of being in a family, to be worthy of being called a wife and a mother.
yes. And I
Uh,
think women are definitely starting to challenge that. We are starting to be like, yeah, okay, it's time to challenge what our ideas are about being a mother and being the boss babe. I mean, I'm all for women who are career driven. I'm all for women in leadership roles. I think we're seeing a lot of like the trad wife, like women who are like, I want to be soft feminine. We're kind of at this point in time where women are waking up to this idea of, I don't want to work myself to death. I don't want to have to prove my worth to the point where it's causing me my health, even on an unconscious level. I think we're all kind of waking up to that. And so, in this attempt to like correct that, we're going to see this pendulum swing. And some women are like, okay, I want to go back to being the traditional housewife, and I want to go back to being the soft mom. I
Hmm.
don't want to work. I think that that has its natural place in us finding how to create a life where we can be mothers or we can choose career, but this idea where it's a choice, it's not a default. For the longest time, women were so abused by patriarchal dominance that our natural reaction for survival was to either become more like men or to say, I'm going to be better than men. Feminism was just a really natural reaction to the amount of abuse that we were being put through. I can see why women are trying their best in whatever capacity they have, including myself, to get to a place that feels healthy and recognizing that we are going to make some major mistakes in that process.
I find this topic fascinating. I also go round and round in circles about it. From a personal perspective, some days I'm like, oh, I just really want to be a housewife and be a mum. I want to be fully present for my children. I don't have children, but if I did, I would want to raise them fully in a really holistic way. And at the same time, some days I'm like, gosh, I really want to take over the world. I really want to like grow my business again. I want to immerse myself and go to my next level. And I can feel those things just as passionately as each other. Sometimes I lie in the middle and I'm like, I want to actually be able to do both. I want a life that facilitates me to be a fully present mother and partner, and also allows me to devote myself as deeply and as thoroughly to my work as I do now when I don't have those responsibilities. Let's take the spectrum of choice all the way from I have no choice to I have full choice, what the middle ground looks like, and then all the way to the end of the spectrum, which is I have full choice and I can devote myself fully and entirely to all levels of my feminine experience to allow me to feel full fulfillment, 100%. Now, that's the idealist, right? And I believe that's possible for sure. In your opinion, what are the ingredients that we need to cultivate to make that possible? Let's start at the spectrum of low choice. You've got low resources. You live in this system, this nuclear family system. You exist in a society that considers that normal, a capitalist society with a monetary system, with inflation that's devaluing your purchasing power. What does the woman do?
Survives. At that point, I mean, we're dealing with basic, right? I mean, yeah,
At that level,
yeah.
what is survival at that level? What does it look like?
Sorry, there's so much density. It's like, oh, yes, there's a lot of density in my body when I'm getting into that place. Because part of that is familiar to me. I think part of that is familiar to most women. I say survival in the context of being unsupported. When a woman or anyone feels like they're in this state of desperation, they're in a state where to get your basic needs met is requires all your energy and your resources and everything you have. That level of scarcity creates unintentionally self oriented behavior that's destructive towards building community. So if I'm trying to survive, especially if I have a baby, if I have nothing, I have no support, and I want to do my best to take care of that baby, I will do anything. I will cheat. I will lie. I will manipulate. I will steal. I will do whatever it takes to feed or to care for my baby. When we put people in states of desperation, they're going to use whatever means they have to try to get those needs met. And so all of a sudden we're shocked, when mothers are doing very manipulative, terrible things to their baby daddies and asking for all this money. And these things are just a byproduct of survival. We have enough resources, especially in America, where we don't have to subject people to that anymore. We've turned the lion into greed. the lion, which was our biggest threat in early human development, is now really become this idea of greed, this idea of people with a lot of wealth, and not all wealthy people, but this idea of it's for me not to share, all of a sudden is going to really bring out the ugliness of our humanity for survival.
Really, really powerful. That is the common and unfortunate reality of a lot of women, including young women today who are having children who, their partner leaves them and that's it. They're in
Yeah.
survival mode
Yes. Yeah.
because with the economic system the way it is, it takes so much more to feel like you're not in survival mode when you live in, especially when you live in a big city and there's so much affluence and
Yes.
there's so much wealth and a coffee costs £4.50, right?
Yeah. Mm.
You can feel like you're in survival
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's women that are living in survival mode that are, maybe we're talking about the middle of the spectrum now, where there's some degree of choice, but there's not full choice, and there's some degree of support, there's not full support, financially, emotionally, whatever. What about those women who are living in that place?
I'd say that's kind of me in a lot of ways. I feel like I've had moments of a lot of desperation and scarcity in my life, but I've also been really fortunate. Although there's a lot of dysfunction emotionally in my nuclear family, because I grew up in a really wealthy background on my mom's side. I think we talked about this last time. Like my dad came from extreme poverty and my mom came from extreme wealth. I've had these like moments where I will step into both sides. I'm a little bit in that middle range where I don't feel like I have access to the choices or the resources that I would need to really support a family. And I think that most women in America kind of find themselves in that situation, especially right now with the
Mm.
housing market, with finances in America. Middle class used to be pretty accessible. It is becoming more and more inaccessible. This gap between, financial struggle and desperation and wealth is becoming bigger in America.
I feel like this is a major catalyst for
Mm.
the disintegration of the middle class, but also the
Mm.
struggle and the survival that a lot of women are feeling, even when they do have what our parents' generation would have considered pretty supportive, you know,
Yeah.
pretty normal backgrounds, is now starting to feel really challenging.
Yes.
The
It's
home
putting
own,
us further in that survival aspect. And it's
yes, and
putting more pressure of like, ooh, I better find out a way to get my resources and to get wealth. And that creates even more of this like me. I need to
mm,
support my family. I'm not going to be focused on community and building relationships because I'm going to be focused on getting whatever I can because I don't want to be, the mom stealing to
yes.
feed her kids.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
very
it's a,
hard start thinking about community life, right?
yeah,
And collective
yeah.
living and collective consciousness when you're under that amount of pressure yourself to provide for your child, your children, yourself. Like
Yeah,
that seems almost irrelevant, like you say.
yeah,
If we're saying that that is a solution, or if we're saying that is the way that we perhaps had and received most support and more support by living in those communities, it's really interesting that the people who perhaps need it the most are the people who are least likely to seek that avenue of alternative lifestyle, and the people
yes,
that have a lot of resources and a lot of privilege who are not in survival mode, they have the time and capacity to sit on podcasts and talk about topics like this and then jet
exactly.
off to god knows where,
Yeah,
to go and explore community living because they're
yeah,
not in survival mode.
yes. I wanted to ask you, Safa, because that's such a great point. Do you feel like that's a reflection of the healing culture? The idea of a lot of the things that we need are often inaccessible to the people that need them the most, and the people that will, kind of come for healings and come to your courses. Do you feel like they're the ones that have the resources, understandably?
It's a really good question. I think that you answered it earlier when you talked about the financial system, the way it's set up and the direction it's going in. the mounting pressure, and I use debt and pressure interchangeably, because if you look at the statistics for the number of Americans that are indebted, it is climbing rapidly. The US is in like 33 trillion of debt, which they'll never pay off, right? So the debt culture is, you are indebted, you are not free, you are enslaved. And this is perpetuated and imprinted on everyone who exists in that country and exists in that system, pretty much all of us, right? And then to survive, you need to go into debt. And then it's like, well, how do you get out? That for me is like the fundamental premise of what happens to people, majority of people, right? And then it's who comes for healing, etc., etc. I think there's a level above that where it's about financial literacy. But there are people, I know them, my parents included, who didn't have anything, right? My parents came to London after a revolution in Zanzibar, having all their businesses and properties literally rug pulled from under their feet overnight. Overnight. 6 weeks later, they were in a deportation center eating boiled rice, going from homeowners, landowners, and business owners, educated, to eating boiled rice, to being shipped to the UK. That was, you know, lots of people have been displaced like that through war, your own mum. And these situations have forced people to rebuild their lives, right? These situations are ongoing in the world today. What is the difference between someone who has come from ancestral trauma, war, displacement, has faced racism, poverty, etc., etc.? What is the difference between that person who rebuilds their life and makes it, and the person who doesn't rebuild their life and make it? Why do some people get to do it and other people don't? Why do some people come from nothing and create something with no support, right? With all the odds against them. My dad faced a lot of odds against him, racism, intentional misunderstanding, a lot, because this was the culture at the time. Society was like that. It was tough for them, considering the free resources, information, tools, and technologies that we have at our disposal that older generations did not have. Considering the mental health support, free information that we have now, even around trauma and somatic medicine, that we did not have that back then. I find it really hard to believe that people who don't have a lot right now can't still try to make use of everything that they do have. And I think the missing link is financial literacy.
I love that.
And
Yeah.
it may sound really dull and boring, right?
No.
But this whole spiritual and healing movement that's trying to encourage young women who are vulnerable, traumatized, broke, and unsupported to sit and manifest in Bali, quite frankly, that's a cult. That's a cult. You're not going to manifest abundance when your fundamental understanding of budget management, forecasting, the basics of what money is and how to make it, how to save it, and how to grow it. Women have not been taught these skills. A lot of women don't even have an interest in this. This is the bridge. Because when you start to develop a language and an interest in your own financial literacy, you build a bridge out of survivorship down in the trenches. You don't know where you're going, but you've got a bridge that takes you up, right? That information is free. Go on Google. It is free information that our parents did not have. I believe that that is the missing link. It may not sound spiritual and glamorous, but I hear from so many women who are like, I can't afford to heal, right? And it's like, okay, how much money have you got coming in? I don't know. How much money do you spend? I don't know. If you know how to do basic level maths, like 5 plus 5 is 10, then you know how to do 10 minus 5 is 5, right? But there's something that's blocking a lot of women from doing this. And then the projection is, I can't afford XYZ resources. I can't afford to heal. If you added up everything that you're spending on food, holidays, garbage online, subscription, makeup, cosmetics, all these things, that'd amount to hundreds and thousands of pounds. You will stay in survivor mode and like victim mode until you sit there with a spreadsheet and a calculator and get real.
I love that. I feel like you have spoken that will really be an important thing for us to focus on.
It has traditionally, it
Right,
has been
right.
structured, so we repel it. It's not really my job. It's not really for me. Like, do I really have to go there? That doesn't sound like much fun. Or it sounds really heavy. Or it makes me think like I'm going to be poor and broke forever. So I don't want to look at my numbers. I don't want to even look at my bank account. Well, look at it because it says £10 in it right now. Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you will learn how to grow that to another zero and another zero and another zero. But you won't learn if you don't look. The same way you can't heal if you don't know what you need to heal, right?
Yes.
You can't grow money, wealth, and stability and opportunity if you don't want to look at your own poverty. It starts with a mindset, it starts with a curiosity, like, let me be curious about this. Why am I
Mm,
broke? And most people who living in the West are not actually broke. They're financially
mm.
irresponsible.
Right, yes.
They haven't got clear priorities. They don't live their life reinforcing the fact that my priority today is A, my priority today is B, and my priority today is C. And anything else that does not align with my priorities is irrelevant. Women will often focus on these intangible activities, low priority, low return, but they put high investment into it because no one's taught them about risk return. I
Mm,
give a lot of this information. I've got a whole course about it. Like I teach a lot of women and coach a lot of women who are therapists, practitioners themselves on how to, it's not just like about mindset and meditation and abundance and manifestation. And it's actually work, but it's not hard.
yeah,
It's not complicated.
yeah.
Everyone can do it because everyone can do basic level math. I consider that this is the missing bridge. And it requires motivation to even desire to build the bridge. When we're in survivor mode, it's hard to feel motivated.
Understandable. All our energies, we're so burnt out. Yeah,
Totally
yeah,
drained. Wake up every morning with
yeah,
brain fog. Last
yeah.
thing you want to do is sit and think about how you're going to
Mhm.
save money and how you're going to make money. And for a lot of
Yeah.
people at the beginning of the journey towards financial sovereignty, it is about how do you save rather than how do you make. Then it becomes how do you make? Then it becomes how do you scale and grow? Then it becomes how do you retain your wealth, right? Then it becomes about passive income. And that's a journey. But you have to start somewhere. And if you don't know how much you're making, how much you're spending, and how much you're saving, basic figures, you're going to be lost in the woods. And of course, your answer is going to be, I can't afford to heal. I can't. There's very few people who genuinely can't afford to heal because if you can afford Wi Fi, there's free blogs, free podcasts, right? Free information, free YouTube videos. I'm not saying that's relevant and useful for people who have got like severe and complex trauma. Yes, they may need one-to-one work, but you can get yourself out of a lot of deep crisis states for free.
True.
Somatic practices are all available for free online. Yoga is available for free online. Meditation, courses on how to become financially literate are all available online. Business ideas, type anything. Free research. You can become an expert for free in anything these days. People are growing themselves from the ghetto, right? And they're becoming multimillionaires. They haven't gone to uni. They've got no parents supporting them, nothing. They're doing it. Why are we different as women? Why can't we do that? We can.
Yes. I love it. It's like bringing the energy of hope back into dark, dense
Absolutely.
places. Yeah.
Absolutely. I really, really believe that. If someone comes to me and says, I've done all these things, I've exhausted all these things, I've taken all these free courses online, read all these journals, done all these practices, said and listed them all out to me and said, and I'm still stuck in survivor mode, I'll be very surprised. The courses that are available from the red brick universities, Yales, the Harvards, the MITs for free. Skills and education is what got my parents out of survivor mode and into a mode where they could build and provide for their family. Skills and education, which they had to pay for back then because there's no internet. You had to
Yeah.
go and pay and sit in a classroom and buy the books and have two jobs to pay for the course and sit there and go home at 9 o'clock at night. They never ate at restaurants. They never went on holiday. They never bought new clothes. They never bought new shoes. Nothing. It was all about investing in getting out of survivor mode. These days, People don't want to do it. The courses are free, but they don't want to do it. They want to go ecstatic and then wonder why they're not making money. Now, I love dancing more than anyone else. Do you know what I mean? I love that too. But I don't go when my bank account is zero. Instead of sitting at home and building, go and spend my money that I don't have on a recreational activity. It's about prioritization. You know,
Right, right.
when you're in a survivor mode, you may not be able to prioritize what makes you feel good. You may have to prioritize the hard work first. That's called being true, real with yourself, you know?
We all need some tough love. Yeah.
Every day we have millions of ways to make money, if that's what our goal is.
Yeah.
Literally, type in Twitter, how to make money. Everyone is telling you how to do it for free. It's easy. Whether or not you want to do it, that's up to you. But it's available. Let's move to the woman who's at the other end of the spectrum, right? So she's living in a nuclear family system. She's got all the resources. She's getting a lot of help from different avenues. She doesn't have to do anything. She can choose. What does that look like? How common do you think that is?
Well, from personal experience, my mother's side of the family was like that and is to some degree. My grandmother's never worked a day in her life, and she had all the financial resources available to her. What she did, which was, I think, is really common, is you hire all your help. So she had nannies to raise her kids. French. It's really common for wealthy French people to hire nannies, to hire cooks and gardeners and all those things. That's what my grandmother did. When I was born, my mother had millions of dollars. So for her, it was like, oh, yeah, we'll just hire a nanny. And my dad, coming from nothing, was like, no way. That can have benefits and consequences. I know that my mother feels really alienated from her mother. There's a benefit and a consequence to everything, and the consequences have benefits and the benefits have consequences. If you hire a nanny, you are giving up personal time with your kids. And then what does that look like for your relationship?
What if a woman doesn't want to be there with her kid all day? Maybe she's like, why should I? I've got my own dreams, my own life. We're talking about the other end of the spectrum. She's got opportunities at her
Yeah.
fingertips, right? What if she's like, I love my children dearly and I'm so devoted to them, but I'm also devoted to myself as a woman? What if she wants to fly around the world with her husband without the kids?
What comes to me is child development. When I worked at different school systems and then there again, like studying birthing process and early child development, I think that we're starting to come to an age through research and science where we're beginning to recognize there are some really crucial imprints on the human psyche in early childhood development. If you're a woman who has a lot of wealth and you're going to make choices about how involved you want to be with your children, if you have that choice, if you have that luxury, I think it's your responsibility to be as educated and as aware as possible with how that's going to affect your kid later in life. When we talk about attachment styles, insecure attachments, are we making choices for people to be connected or disconnected? What is the point in having children if you decide that you don't want to be that involved with them? I'm not saying it's wrong to do that, but I think it's important to ask ourselves those questions. You know, when I have the freedom of choice, am I going to make choices that are going to foster a healthier community? Do I want to imprint on that adult psychological dysfunction because I just chose not to be present at really crucial times in their development? My mother was a little bit like that. My mother wouldn't even cash her paychecks when I was a kid, when I was raised. I think that she went through a period of intense postpartum depression. She moved to a country where she didn't speak the language. And she's like, I'm going to have children because that's just what we do. And then when she had children, she had so much pain around that she just went to work as a way to get away from being a mother and didn't cash her paychecks. And it was kind of a repeat of the fact that she was raised by a nanny and had an absentee mother figure too. And I don't think her nanny was a very mothering person.
That's really interesting. You're making the connections between the intergenerational trauma of maybe not being parented by your own parent and being sent to boarding school or
Oh
being raised by a nanny,
yeah. Yeah,
how that affects the attachment style and the parenting style and what the consequences are of that. It's really interesting the connections you're making with childhood development because we are talking about the other end of the spectrum. And it's so relevant because it's actually your personal life. It's like what you went through with your mom and what she went through with her mom. You're really talking from lived experience, right? It is relevant to a lot of people here in the UK. A lot of the middle class or upper class, boarding school and nannies to care for your children was very, very normal. And it was seen as a virtuous and a healthy thing to do to send your kid to boarding school. And then you see them at Christmas time, you see them maybe at Easter and for a few weeks during the summer holiday. And they're raised by teachers and other children, or they're raised by nannies. In the Middle East, it's very normal to have nannies raising your children. When we say raising, we're talking about a lot of the not just the emotional aspects, but also a lot of the physical, logistical aspects like feeding, which is still an emotional thing, right? And so I think there's a conception in some communities or a misconception in some communities that, well, we have nannies to help, to change and to feed and to shower, but I still read my kid a bedtime story. But does the kid ever learn how it's treated when it's messy? Does mommy still love me when I'm messy? Does mommy still love me when I've shat my pants? Because mommy doesn't come near me when I've shat my pants,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yes.
When I wet myself and I'm scared at night, I get given to someone else who soothes
Yeah.
me. I just wonder what having the financial opportunities to have help does lend itself to a more fulfilled life for everybody involved in that family system, or whether actually, like you say, there might be benefits, but there's also consequences of those benefits. So I'm going to invite you to just wrap it up, whether it's words of advice for women who are listening to this podcast, who are thinking about their family systems, past, present, future, who are thinking about what their roles are that they're taking on, what their level of fulfillment is, who are maybe considering how they can improve their financial position or the amount of time they spend with their children, whatever it is.
Recap, I feel like some of the gems that came from our conversation were the importance of financial literacy, especially for women. And then the rest is sort of more accessible from that. And trying to get creative about creating financial resources for ourselves so that we're not resorting to manipulation and destructive means of trying to get support. That was a really big one, was the financial literacy, and just, making that more accessible to us. Everything is so much easier when we have more financial literacy to make those choices.
I want to also just mention that the family system, and that family system can consist of connection and disconnection. Usually it's a mixture of everything. And we are all on a quest for deeper connection, harmony, healing. And we may not have got that with our family of origin. We may not even have that in community. We may never get that in community. But if we have that with ourselves, truth be told, it doesn't really matter whether we are in community or not in community, whether we're in a family or not in a family, because we have a deep connection with ourselves. And the external may be wonderful, may be suboptimal, but we have the one thing that really, really, really is like the bedrock of our entire existence, which is the connection with our heart,
Yes.
right? So whatever it is that gets you there, whether it's living humbly and being closer on that, survival mode, but if it gets you in connection with your heart, right? And you feel alive, like what you said earlier in the podcast. You said like sometimes our trauma actually makes us feel alive.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it makes you feel. right? Being financially resourced does not necessarily make you feel alive, right? Let's find whatever is right for us at this moment in time and know that we are working through a whole spectrum and flowing through all these different places. There is no right or wrong way to live life. But one thing that won't change is that Justine and I are going to be here
Yes.
regularly shredding up the mic
Yes. That's
and dropping big bombs of love and wisdom
right.
and laughter and humor every single episode. In you on every single episode now because I love the way we vibe. And I love your
Oh.
wisdom. I love your insights. I could listen to you all day long.
Oh, me too. It's very mutual. Yeah,
It really
very.
is. Until the next time.
Yes, till the next time.